2 years of bloody conflict, could peace finally be returning to South Sudan? Following a deal signed in August of last year, the feuding parties have finally agreed on a transitional government of national unity, which will see the country's ministry shared between loyalists and former rebels. But analysts have warned that despite the progress, many crucial issues in the peace agreement have not been addressed. So what can be done to get the East African nation back on track? And is this a new dawn for South Sudan? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Well, the two warring parties in South Sudan have reached an agreement to form a transitional government in coming weeks based on a peace deal signed in August of last year. The African Union, IGAD and the United Nations, together with China, played a major role to broker the South Sudanese peace deal that paved the way for the unity government expected to end the war in the world's youngest nation. Patrick Oyet filed this report.
Conflict broke out in South Sudan in December 2013, only 2 years into South Sudan's hard-earned independence. The conflict killed tens of thousands and displaced millions others, bringing the country's fledgling economy to a near standstill. It touched off a humanitarian crisis of an unprecedented scale, but now there is hope, thanks to the unrelenting efforts of regional and international actors that mediated the conflict and brought pressure to bear on the warring parties to end the bloodletting. And China played a major role.
The People's Republic of China has been represented throughout as a partner, not only in attending those peace talks between the government and the SPLM-IO and the other stakeholders. China has also supported financially the process of IGAD mediation by facilitating all the areas which were connected in trying to bring peace to the Republic of South Sudan.
In the wake of the violence, China promptly sent 700 peacekeepers to protect civilians and guard key installations. The Chinese blue helmets quickly became a constant feature in the search for peace in South Sudan. Through its embassy in South Sudan, China also extended development grants and financial assistance to sustain the peace process and bolster the struggling economy.
China has been always active supporting the peace progress of South Sudan. At the very beginning, China is actively working together with the international and regional medias led by IGAD to ensure that the disputes in South Sudan could be settled through political dialogues rather than severe fighting.
The unity government has its job pretty much cut out. There is much rebuilding to be done, and so is reconciliation in the wake of a conflict that deeply polarized the country. So as regional bodies and the international community continue to push for a peaceful transition in South Sudan, the much awaited government of national unity will be the first step in restoring normalcy in the country. In the meantime, South Sudanese across the country can only hope for the best. Patrick Oyet, CCTV, Juba, South Sudan.
Now, as mentioned, the African Union has played a pivotal role in guiding South Sudan to the agreement. CCTV's Girum Chala spoke to the African Union Commission's Deputy Chair, Erastus Mwencha, about the process.
The South Sudanese government and its rebels fought for 2 years and many have suffered. Now, why did it take so long and so many lives to end the conflict in South Sudan?
Well, South Sudan is a very young nation that achieved independence, or call it self-determination, only in the year 2011. And if you look back, it is a very short period that it has had its own life. And perhaps if you wanted to ask yourself what could have gone wrong, one can, come up with many observations. And perhaps that's why it has also taken long to get to the answer of where we are today. Part of it would be that as a young country, have not developed enough institutional framework that could support the nation. For any nation is as strong as its institutional framework that it has. And of course, if you look at the other aspects of the economy, the social infrastructure, South Sudan is emerging from a long protracted war that started way back in 1955. And so it is historical that this country has gone through this tragedy. But I think it is important to look at what the leaders themselves have indicated, and refreshing to see, for instance, the message from His Excellency the President of the people saying that they regret that the wrong road they have taken to reach this, a road that meant in the intervening period people dying, people displaced, but I think what is important is where we are today, that there is an agreement and the country now should start looking to the future, but of course learn the history of the past.
Are you confident that the peace hold and the transitional government of national unity will deliver on its mandate of writing a new constitution and organizing elections by the end of 2018?
Well, I think no one can give a guarantee to say, well, the national unit government. But I think there are imperatives. Again, based on the earlier questions you asked, I think it's important for the people of South Sudan not to allow the people of South Sudan to go through this experience that they have gone through. That should really compel every one of us, including the guarantors of this peace, the international community, to support this process. I think part of the success of this would be the commitment from the stakeholders themselves, the unity parties that have come together, but also the role of the international community, because as I said earlier, if you go back, South Sudan needs a lot of support in the area of economic reconstruction, in the area of institutional development, and obviously there is a need and for the African Union. In fact, I remember some time back, under what we call solidarity support of the member states, we were already drumming up support for countries to assist in many areas, whether it is in training in security forces, supporting with key personnel. There is still a lot of support that is needed for South Sudan to be able to move forward.
What is the AU's role in helping South Sudan achieve the transitional goals and ensure that no party reneges on the deal?
This is really a perfect case of where the continental body and the regional body that is very much responsible or owned, that owns the issue, that have worked hand in glove in coming to where we are. And in this case, really, IGAD and the African Union have seamlessly worked together to deliver us where we are. And we want to, particularly from the African Union point of view, to commend the efforts of the IGAD partners, IGAD mediation process. The most important question that you also ask is, what is the role of the African Union? We know we have, President Momhai, former president of Botswana, was there as really the African Union appointee, but also in collaboration with IGAD. And part of his role is to support the parties in the implementation of the peace accord.
We're going to take a short break here, but when we come back, my expert guests will help chart South Sudan's process to peace. Stay with us.
Working together implies a process of compromise and reconciliation, give and take, mutual tolerance, and patience, in small ways as well as in more significant adjustments. The actions of any party must therefore be considered in that context. We must be practical, we must be reasonable, we must be accommodative of different views, and when obstacles arise, we should not see them as opportunities to fail or stall the process, but seek solutions through compromise and dialogue.
That was Festus Mohai, the African Union chairman of the Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission in South Sudan, speaking of the situation in South Sudan. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Now, to help further unpack the deal between President Salva Kiir and Riek Machar, I have expert guests standing by. In Nairobi, South Sudan's Deputy Ambassador to Kenya, Ambassador James Morgan. In Johannesburg, he's a researcher at the Good Governance Africa, Stephen Johnson. And in Beijing, Research Fellow at the Institute of West Asian and African Studies, Professor Ho Wenping. Thank you all for joining in the discussion. Ambassador Morgan, I'll start off with you. Now, the warring parties in that conflict in South Sudan are to form a transitional government of national unity after almost 2 years of conflict. Are you confident at this point that this is now over? Are you optimistic?
Yes, thank you once again. Yes, your question, I have to tell you that that is correct. I am very optimistic that peace at last has come back to my country, South Sudan.
Well, Stephen Johnson, Festus Mohai there has called for patience, he's called for tolerance. He says all parties have to be accommodative. What's your take now on the end of this conflict?
I think that we need to take all the factors into consideration. It seems that the rebels and the government do have a modicum of commitment to the peace process, but we're going to have to watch over the next few months as to whether this commitment transforms itself into real actions on the part of the government. There are many challenges facing them, and it will be very important for all the different actors, not only the rebels and the government, but also the opposition parties, to work together to overcome the challenges that they are faced with.
Professor Ho Wenping, you're watching this from China, though. What's your take?
Well, I'm very glad to hear that Ambassador from South Sudan to Kenya now has been taking a very optimistic point of view. But from my observation, I think I can only take a very cautious, optimistic point of view because it seems to me all those steps forward now looks like walking on a very thin ice. It's still lack mutual trust. Mutual trust is just the beginning to build. When we look back at the past, almost the 6 peace deal, those 6 peace deals has been ended in failure. But this time around, only one thing has been added. One is the very strong international pressure. Another is a very good monitoring team, like we just heard from former president of Botswana. He now is leading this team. So those watchdogs are there. So that's why I have been heard. People are saying, there are some people are saying this is a forced peace. Right. Forced peace. So this is a very unfortunate term to express this peace.
Ambassador Morgan, I'll just put that back to you, though, that Professor Ho did mention that 6 other deals had fallen through, and this is the one that is got the most optimism. What is it about this particular deal that gives the people inside South Sudan hope that finally the conflict in South Sudan has been resolved?
Okay, well, the failure of those deals that she referred to, it was not in fact the fault of the government. The agreement, when the ceasefire, the first ceasefire which was declared on the 14th of January 2014, within 40 or 24 hours after signing the peace agreement, the president arrived back home from Addis Ababa in a very jubilant reception at the international airport of Juba, and he declared to the people of South Sudan that he had come back with peace, and therefore he ordered all the SPLA forces, our national forces, to remain in their barracks, not to attack, but only to defend themselves. But what happened? As all of you are aware, that peace, that agreement did not even stand the time. It was violated by the fighting forces of under Dr. Riek Machar.
Right.
And the violation was, the mistake from the beginning was the international community and IGAD, which was supposed to oversee how the peace sign can be maintained, did not even have people on the ground. So they continued blaming both sides. But now that these blame games, we are not going to go back to them. Now that peace is being signed, so we have to, and it is also good that the international community, which is mentioned, that now we have this body which is overseeing the peace implementation. We are sure that, of course, with the presence of this, of the GEMEC, which is under the former Botswana president, we will now see who will be the spoiler. That was the most important thing that we wanted, because from the beginning, both sides had been blamed throughout these 20 months of fighting.
Right. Professor Ho, though, the role of the international community is really going to be vital here. Is there confidence, though, from the international community that their oversight role will continue in South Sudan?
Well, this confidence itself also is in the process of building. It depends fully on what kind of actions has been taken by both sides, either President Kiir or from the rebel leader Marshall. So this conference building itself, I think now gets some momentum. For example, this security deal has been signed at the end of last November now, and even talking about how to organize this unity of government. Also, we have seen a very beginning. So all of this now has gained some confidence for the international observers, but it's not the period end yet. Lots of challenges still lying ahead. Lots of question marks still hasn't been resolved. So I think conference itself is there, but it cannot determine everything.
All right, Stephen Johnson, I'll come to you now and bring you into this conversation, because one of the issues that could be a pointer to a relapse would be, the army and, pretty much everybody in South Sudan now as an adult has a gun. What needs to be done, though, to avoid relapse here at this point?
I think this is the point during the peace process where the international community can definitely take a lead, especially under the auspices of the United Nations mission to South Sudan. What the AU and the UN needs to do is guarantee security for the people of Sudan and begin the process of disarmament, demobilization and reintegration, because unfortunately if you have so many potential combatants, it takes just the smallest flare-up for this to turn into a nationwide problem again. So I think at this point we do need the international community to maintain their commitment, not just in terms of aid or diplomatic pressure, but also in terms of troops on the ground to maintain peace, not just in Juba, but in the towns and villages across South Sudan. We also need to see a joint military command. The rebels need to be reintegrated back into the army, and the South Sudanese government needs to take into account that when the conflict started, it was immediately along ethnic lines, and they need to address this within the armed forces. So I think what we need to look at is demobilization and unifying the South Sudanese armed forces as the basis for security across the country.
Ambassador Morgan, has that demobilization exercise, though, begun, because it was one of the issues raised in the agreement?
Oh, yes. First of all, the agreement has not yet talked about the demobilization, but that is always there in our program. What happened was that they wanted to demilitarize some of the cities, including our capital, Juba, which is now on the process. Our armed forces have started moving out 25 kilometers, as it was in the agreement. So the point that will come next will now be the demobilization and integration, which had been there since we even ended the previous war of 2000, where the CPA was signed here in Nairobi in 2005. So that process of demobilization and integration was ongoing until this war again, this crisis flared up last December, December 2013. But that one will come, of course. At the moment, what we are tackling at the present is, first of all, what we need to do as the priority now, the former rebels, because now we don't have rebels. They have signed peace, and we don't expect them to be rebels again. What we need from them now is that they have to follow the steps which had been laid down by the agreement. And good as my other colleagues mentioned here, we are also happy that there is a presence of the international community on the ground, and there will be no any other loopholes of blaming games where it was said to be both sides maybe violated this and that. Now that the international community should be on the ground, which is already there. We have the chairman of the GEMEC. Now what is needed is the formation of the government of national unity. Recently, each party has taken its ministerial portfolios, and now what needs to be done first is the appointment of Dr. Riek Machar as the first vice president of the Republic of South Sudan and the other vice president. After that, then there will be the announcement or the submission of the lists, the names of various parties that have nominated the ministerial portfolios.
Right.
After they had been satisfied, because they are the one who have collected whatever they wanted. Now this list will be submitted back to the President of the Republic, who will now issue a decree to appoint all of them without any change, of course, as per the agreement says. So this is the first step.
Right. Professor Ho Wen-ping, though, a lot has been talked on this program about the international community. China has been a major player in the peace process in South Sudan. What role do you see China playing, though, in moving the process forward, in creating more stability for South Sudan?
China has been playing a very constructive role for bringing all parties together to take this negotiation process as the way to resolve the problem. For example, we have appointed a special envoy in charge of this South Sudan issue, and special envoy has been traveling back and forth for many times to South Sudan, and also even to the neighboring country like Kenya, Uganda, and Sudan and Ethiopia. So trying to bring the messages all through to different parties. We also, like for example, our foreign minister, Mr. Wang Yi, when he visited Ethiopia earlier last year, himself had hosting a peace talk, bringing the two parties together, either President side, President Kiir, also the opposition party from the Machar, and then help them and to reach some consensus. So, and also, I think China has dispatched like 700 combat troops joining the UN peacekeepers now based in South Sudan. So just my colleague has just mentioned, international community need to add more peacekeepers in South Sudan. So I think China has played our part.
Right. Stephen Johnson, though, from your perspective as a security and conflict resolution researcher there, what are the challenges in terms of conflict management, in conflict resolution? What are the challenges that will be facing South Sudan now?
One of the biggest challenges that hasn't been mentioned yet, and the government really does need to address, is that of the humanitarian crisis. At the moment, we are looking at 1.5 million people displaced. We have about 4 million people who are at risk of starvation and an extra 1 million people who need additional assistance. Now, the government's biggest challenge now doesn't actually, beyond providing basic security, is the fact that they have so many people who are at risk of starvation. And in the south of Sudan, the planting season, in the south of South Sudan, the planting season starts in March, and in the north it starts in May. So the government has about 2.5 months to make sure that the south of the country is calm and secure enough for people to return home and plant the crops that they need to survive for the next year. And in the north they have about another 4 months. And this is where the security is key, is that they need to make sure that people feel safe enough to return home, to return to their farms and businesses, and are able to provide the food that the country needs for the next 12 to 18 months. This is a key point in this peace deal, as even though the government and the former rebels, the SPLM-IO, have the government has a larger share. If you look at how the ministries are split, President Kiir's supporters maintain control over most of the ministries involved with security, justice and finance, whereas the Vice President, or soon-to-be Vice President Mashar, his supporters maintain control over the ministries of petroleum, mining and mostly development-related ones. So it is a very clever split of the ministries, as it means that neither side has a clear upper hand, and for South Sudan to work, they will need to work together, as if either side doesn't decide to come to the table and cooperate, the other side would effectively be able to hamstring them. In terms of how this deal will hold, it is going to take a huge amount of political will from within South Sudan, but also from the international community. As we mentioned with the demobilization, there are many armed people, and it may be tempting for fringe elements to return to warfare instead of sitting around the table and discussing their problems. But I think with partners such as China, the UN, the African Union, and South Sudan's neighboring countries, they can apply the correct diplomatic pressure to make sure that all the parties involved maintain the peace agreement and stay and keep to the points that have been outlined in it. So I'm cautiously hopeful, but unfortunately this is still very, very fresh, and we will need a couple of, well, not months, we're going to need 2 years to see this play out. And we have hope for South Sudan, but it is going to be an uphill battle for them. There are many challenges.
Right. Professor Ho Weng-Ping, very briefly, your prediction for South Sudan?
Yes, again, I'm also cautiously optimistic. I think the challenges lying ahead is still quite huge.
Right. Ambassador Morgan, you have the final word. What do we expect from South Sudan moving forward?
Yes, we are optimistic that the lessons we have learned, we will always look into what has happened, and I believe that all the parties to this agreement are ready to take the country forward with the help from our neighbors, the international community, and our friendly countries like China and other countries.
Right, and that's all we have time for this week. But thank you to my guests for their insights. In Nairobi, South Sudan's Deputy Ambassador to Kenya, James Morgan. In Johannesburg, he's a researcher at the Good Governance Africa, Stephen Johnson. And in Beijing, Research Fellow at the Institute of West Asian and African Studies, Professor Ho Weng-Ping. Remember, you can join the conversation online through Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. To join us again next week for another edition of Talk Africa. Goodbye.